my name is Chad Kellogg. I'm 39 years old and I'm from the Pacific Northwest. Grown up in Seattle and the Seattle area. I've been climbing for going on 27 years now. It's more than a lifestyle for me. And some of my accomplishments include speed ascents on Rainier, the speed record on Mount McKinley, winning the international speed climb in Kontengri, Kazakhstan in 2003, and then putting up first ascents on unclimbed peaks in other areas of the world. Having grown up in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle, you know, one of the beauties of the area is that you stare at Mount Rainier almost every clear day. And for a climber and a mountaineer in the local area, I mean, if you want to get into climbing, that's the first object that you see almost daily. So naturally, I was drawn to it and wanted to climb it. And then having climbed it, you know, numerous times, thought about different styles and ways I could push myself. Speed climbing is a form of alpine style. You're starting a pursuit, a climb, and going from the beginning to the end, basically in a single push. You may stop for a little bit of food or to brew up some water if you need to, but essentially it's a continuous movement throughout the climb. You may do something that takes somebody else a week in a 24-hour period. Alpine style, you may not bring any bivouac gear, but it may take multiple days to still pull it off. So in a sense, the two are very close to one another. In my first organized speed climb, which was in Kazakhstan in the Kontengri 2003 challenge, basically we had a group of 7 contestants from all over the world and with different backgrounds. There are marathon runners, ultra runners, alpinists, high altitude climbers, and we basically came with our skill set and we had to make it from a starting line at 13,000 feet on the glacier up to the summit was 23,000 feet, but the course had been set through 20,500 feet. And it was an interesting comparison to the one in 2011 because you have a disparate group of folks with different backgrounds, but we're all trying to make it round trip to the finish line as quickly as possible, with the skills that we have. And so that's comparable. And we're just racing against one another. We're not racing against a record time that's already been set. We're physically trying to, best the next guy.
And that was a foot race.
And that was a foot race, absolutely. You can run for 15 miles through the woods, up through the foothills to the base of the glacier, and then, switch onto the glacier mode and turn on your climbing mountaineering experience up to the summit, and then come back down and then get to run through the woods again. But it's very different from running a marathon once you get to that glacier. It's a different mindset because a lot of times you're going to be on that glacier for many hours, and it's a steep mountain, exceeding 30 degrees, like on the Coleman head wall, and so you can't run there. You're going to have to put on crampons and make your way up. And especially in 1911, I'm sure there was very little foot traffic there except from the judges, and you're not really following a well-broken path. So you have to have some familiarity, I would guess, with reading glaciated terrain. And Mount Baker it's a remarkable peak in the lower 48 in that it gets such a large amount of snowfall, being 28 miles from the ocean, that the glaciers on the 10,000 foot peak are serious. I mean, it's a serious glacier to get on. The Coleman down low, I mean, there's some 300 foot deep cracks there that would swallow you in a moment's notice. Well, my next goal is to climb Mount Everest in a speed ascent and set the speed record. I want to go from base camp to the summit and back to base camp in a single push without using supplemental oxygen alone. For me, that's basically the highest style I could achieve in a speed ascent on that route. And that's my current project. Other projects would be to do first ascents on unclimbed peaks, and first ascents on peaks that have been climbed, but putting up new routes. I think that's the future and my favorite thing. You have to have enough staying power to wait for the conditions to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And then essentially everything comes together. The weather, the health.
The weather's the big thing.
Yeah, I mean, the course, the crowds.
That was a big problem.
Equipment stashing, I mean, 2 speed ascents last year, someone stole my equipment. It's my caches that I'd put in along the way to pick up, so I would have to carry less weight. On 2 occasions, I had equipment stolen. You travel all the way around the world, putting $50,000 on the line of your own money, and then somebody's like taking your $100 ski pole.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, man! Somebody's that hard up for a ski pole or like a pair of boots that they're gonna take yours, But they are. There are people out there who's.
Are they doing it because they need the stuff, or are they doing it just to sabotage you?
I don't know. It's either. They just like, I need this to make my life easier, and there it is. I'm taking it.
So how does this work for you? Is it because you're doing this so fast that you don't need to fully acclimate like everybody else if you're speed climbing up and down?
No. I've already done the acclimatization. I'm climbing the mountain 2 and 3 times before I run it. Everest is kind of a unique animal because you're in the death zone.
Right.
So there's this point where you have to, there's this point where you have to spend enough time there in order to get acclimated, but if you spend too much time there, you're dying.
Breaks down.
Yeah, so it's this super fine line where I screwed it up last year just because I didn't know, I didn't have the experience. I did a simulation speed climb up to, 5,700 meters, just below the death zone.
Right.
And I took enough out of me in that simulation that I couldn't ever recover from it, even a month later. Yeah, it was interesting. The only place you can recover is 25 miles away.
So how can you
properly?
I understand.
How can you acclimatize? You can acclimatize up to 26,000 feet.
Yeah.
And then anything above 26,000 feet, you're dying. So you don't want to go. You can, as long as you're acclimatized up there and you kind of know, the route. You have no business being there.
So if you acclimate yourself at 26,000 feet.
Up to.
Let's say you do that up to that point, but you want to do this in one push. So when you're going from there up to 29, 34, 35, whatever, and back down, you're not. I mean, you're not. Are you actually really physically capable of doing that in that stretch?
Yeah, but
as long as you did it and got out of there fast.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean,
that's the trick.
That's the whole ticket.
Okay.
It's so I mean, I have an altitude chamber here I sleep in, but it's a really tricky balance. It's a personal balance. Like nobody has the same physique or the same experience. So it was kind of it was an interesting learning curve. I wanted to pull it off last year, but it would have been quite the boon if I'd pulled it off on my first time on the mountain. Financially, it was expensive, but so I wanted to. But I learned quite a bit there, and some of the things that I learned were just about pacing yourself, and I went up to 27,000, almost 300 feet. So I'm like 1,700 feet, 1,600 feet shy of the summit there, and I mean, I felt good. I felt pretty good, but I didn't have everything. I made a few mistakes. Like footwear choices down low on the mountain, and like breaking through an ice-covered pond and getting my feet wet and having to like change out my footwear. And then I got to Camp 1 and someone had stolen my ski pole, and I got to Camp 2 and my cooks are like smoking cigarettes and like my food wasn't ready, and you know, all these things, like they don't seem like that big of a deal
is what really did
in any one spot. Well, yeah, that was a showstopper.
Yeah.
But you kind of get a feeling texture for like how the run's going, and you can tell like if everything's going smoothly and it's going to plan, and you got the tailwind and you're just nailing it and your body's rested and it feels good and you're charging, versus like if you crash through the ice and then you put on track spikes and it's above freezing and you can't get any purchase because it's all mush, and then somebody stole your stuff. Like all of a sudden it starts adding up and you're like, geez, my rule, if I'm 3 things go wrong, you run away. And
and obviously, if you're overexerting yourself, as you're doing this, trying to do this in one push,
right,
does that increase your chance for pulmonary edema, or what's the other one? Cerebral.
Yeah.
Does that increase that chance for you?
Well, what happens? It's a different dynamic than that. That's kind of a constant, give or take. I'll come back to that in a second. But what happens is you have a lactic acid threshold. So what you want to do is push out your lactic acid buildup as far as possible, because you're talking about 20 plus hours one way. So that's only the halfway mark too, right? Then you got to like not die and get back down. So if you make for me, you have the Khumbu icefall at the bottom. And you want to get through the Khumbu icefall quickly because it's an extremely dangerous place. But you don't want to have a big lactic acid dump in the first 20% of your climb, because you're going to be carrying that acid with you the rest of the time, and you won't be able to exert to your full ability, because that lactic acid is generally building up until you hit a threshold at which you've maxed out. And once you hit that maxed out spot, your athletic performance begins to decline, or at least plateau. So you're trying to push that out far, and that has to do with your training ahead of time.
It's like for a runner, you're hitting the wall then.
Yeah, totally. So you're trying to push that wall out, at least until the summit, if not a bit further. But for me, I kind of hit it before 26,000 feet. I'd already hit it, because I expended so much energy in the first 25% of the climb. I probably spent 35% of my energy in the first 25% instead of expending 20% of my energy or 15% of my energy in that first 25% of the climb. So that was an interesting experience. And I already knew that lesson, but to have it hit me again on that summit day when I knew that was my day and that was it was really disappointing. But I also knew that I had to keep going just to see how it was going to play out, and that I knew in the back of my mind that it may not be the day for it, but when you got 50 grand on the table, you got to play that hand, as far as you can, until you're like, okay, that's how far I could take it, until I felt like I might be stepping into the other side, And once you step into the other side, it's a conscious choice that, you may not be coming back from that. You've pulled into a different margin of headspace, and I wonder, if on that summit day in 1913 some of those guys crossed into that space, even if they were only at 10,000 feet, they were in a whiteout, they were high on a mountain in a storm, and a dangerous place to be because of crevasses and other hazards, avalanches and so on. But the allure to them was probably, they had so much invested in at that point, why not do the other extra 1,500 vert and the prize money, dangling out there. Yeah, and in my experience on Mount Everest, I took off at a afternoon start because I wanted to be high on the mountain early in the morning, and I actually encountered conditions that were warmer than expected, and I was just wearing essentially canvas shoes with short spikes on the bottom, and the conditions were too warm. So instead of being able to just sprint up in light shoes up the crust on top of the ice, I was actually breaking through into slush and just spinning my wheels, caused me to lose all sorts of efficiency.
Do you think yourself and some of your contemporaries would ever be interested in doing the Mount Baker Marathon race?
Well, I'm surprised that you hadn't tried it before.